two faceless figures dragging something through the rain. A pale creature standing upright in the middle of a dark road, and deep in the frozen woods, footprints that simply stopped. These are three terrifying encounters shared by people who swear they witnessed something impossible. So tonight, turn off the lights, get comfortable, and remember, some things are better left unseen. Tonight's story comes from an anonymous viewer who sent me a long, frantic email late last week. He swore up and down that after this specific incident, he sold his car, moved to a dense city, and promised himself he would never, ever take a cross-country road trip again. I want you to dim the lights, put on your headphones, and let's dive into the absolute nightmare he experienced on a forgotten stretch of highway. It was the late summer of 2021. Our narrator, who we will call Dave, and his best buddy, Marcus, were driving back from a week-long camping trip in the mountains. They were trying to push through the night to make it back to Los Angeles by morning. You know how it is. When you're young, you think you're invincible. You're running on cheap energy drinks, and saving a few bucks on a motel sounds like the smartest idea in the world. Around 1:30 a.m., the weather completely turned on them. It wasn't just a light drizzle, it was one of those torrential, violent downpours that suddenly drops out of the sky without warning. It was the kind of heavy rain where your windshield wipers are going at maximum speed, thrashing back and forth, but you still can't see more than 10 feet in front of the hood. The sound of the rain hammering against the thin metal roof of Dave's old sedan was absolutely deafening. They were on a desolate stretch of two-lane highway, miles and miles away from the main interstate. Marcus was passed out in the passenger seat, his head bouncing against the cold glass of the window. Dave was gripping the steering wheel so tight his knuckles were turning white. The caffeine had worn off hours ago, the heater was broken, and his bladder was screaming. He desperately needed a bathroom, but more importantly, he needed a break from staring into the hypnotic, exhausting sheets of driving rain. "Hey man," Dave muttered, aggressively nudging Marcus's shoulder. "Wake up, I seriously gotta pull over." Marcus just grunted, shifting in his seat, still half asleep. At exactly 2:00 a.m., a flickering, faint yellow light pierced through the curtain of rain. It was an old, rusted-out sign for an independent gas station. As Dave pulled the car off the slick asphalt and onto a deeply rutted gravel lot, the headlights washed over the property. It was completely abandoned. The pumps were ancient and rusted, wrapped in faded yellow caution tape that was whipping wildly in the stormy wind. The windows of the small convenience store were totally boarded up with dark, rotting plywood. There was a single, dim halogen street lamp near the far edge of the lot, buzzing loudly with electricity, casting a sickly yellow glow over the immediate area. Just beyond that circle of light, there was a massive, jagged rock formation jutting up into the pitch black sky, typical of the barren desert landscape. "Dude, this place is sketchy as hell," Marcus mumbled, finally sitting up and rubbing his heavy eyes. "Are you sure you want to stop here? Let's just keep going." "I literally cannot hold it for another second," Dave replied, shifting the car into park, but intentionally keeping the engine running. "I'll just water the weeds by the side of the building. Keep the doors locked. I will be right back." Dave popped the door open. The freezing wind and rain instantly soaked his t-shirt, sending a violent shiver down his spine. He sprinted toward the side of the abandoned brick building, keeping close to the wall for whatever miserable cover it offered. He did his business as fast as humanly possible, shivering uncontrollably, his eyes constantly darting over his shoulder. You know, that primal, heavy feeling you get when you're completely isolated in the dark. That deep, creeping sensation in the back of your neck telling you that someone, or something, is watching you from the shadows. Dave felt it. It was heavy, suffocating, and instantly triggered his fight, or flight response. As Dave zipped up his pants and turned to sprint back to the safety of the idling car, something caught his peripheral vision. Up on that massive rock formation, just at the absolute edge of the lot, where the sickly yellow halogen light barely reached, there was a shadow, a figure. It was standing perfectly still in the torrential rain, looking down at the abandoned gas station. Looking right down at Dave's car. Dave froze. The freezing rain was stinging his eyes, so he squinted hard, wiping the water from his face with a trembling hand. It was definitely a person. A tall, unnervingly still silhouette standing against the stormy night sky. Pure panic spiked in Dave's chest. He booked it back to the car, his shoes slipping on the wet gravel. He yanked the door open, threw himself into the driver's seat, slammed the door shut, and mashed the lock button. "Whoa, what the hell is wrong?" Marcus asked, suddenly wide awake and sitting bolt upright. "You look like you just saw a ghost." "Man, there's someone out there," Dave said, his voice trembling so hard he could barely get the words out. He pointed a shaking finger toward the darkness. "Up by those rocks. Just standing there in the pouring rain watching us." Marcus leaned forward, wiping the thick condensation off the inside of the windshield with his sleeve. "I don't see anything out there, man. It's completely pitch black." "I'm telling you, someone is out there," Dave insisted. His hand hovered nervously over the steering column. "I'm going to hit the high beams." With a sharp, loud click, the car's high beams flooded the edge of the property in blinding, intense white light. Both of the young men instantly stopped breathing. It wasn't just one figure. Down at the base of the jagged rock formation, partially hidden by a thick patch of dead, overgrown sagebrush, were two figures. They were dressed from head to toe in long, heavy black raincoats that seemed to strangely absorb the harsh light of the headlamps. And they were dragging something. It was a massive, extremely heavy-looking black canvas bag. They were pulling it out from behind the rocks. From the way the bag slumped, sagged, and dragged against the wet gravel, the weight, the shape, and the proportions looked horribly, unmistakably human. "What the absolute fuck?" Marcus whispered, his voice cracking into a high pitch, as if they had heard him clearly over the roaring, deafening storm. Both of the figures in black stopped dead in their tracks. Slowly, moving in perfect, unnatural unison, they dropped the heavy black bag to the ground. And then they turned their heads to look directly into the blinding glare of the high beams. Dave felt his stomach violently drop into his shoes. His blood ran instantly ice cold. They didn't have faces. Where there should have been eyes, a nose, a mouth. There was absolutely nothing, just a completely smooth, featureless, pale white surface. Dave's brain desperately scrambled to rationalize the horror he was looking at. "They're masks," he told himself in a panic. "They have to be ski masks or weird plastic Halloween masks." But as the bright headlights illuminated them, he realized the terrifying truth. The light didn't bounce off their faces the way it would hit latex, plastic, or silicone. There was no artificial shine. The surface was completely matte, looking exactly like polished bone or dense cartilage. It was a blank, organic canvas of flesh, toned white, flawlessly smooth. There were no indentations where eye sockets should rest. There was no slit for a mouth to breathe. It looked like real skin, stretched violently taut over a solid bone plate. For 3 agonizing, silent seconds, nobody moved. The two faceless entities just stood there in the pouring rain, staring back at the car with empty, featureless voids. Even without eyes, Dave could feel an intense, predatory, intelligent gaze locking directly onto him through the glass. It was a feeling of absolute, pure malevolence that radiated through the storm. Then, the taller figure on the right took a slow, deliberate, Heavy step toward the car. Drive. Marcus screamed at the absolute top of his lungs, shattering the silence in the car. Davjusthe of no. Dave didn't even think. It was pure instinct. He slammed his foot down as hard as he could on the gas pedal. The car's tires spun out wildly on the wet gravel, kicking up a massive spray of mud and rocks before finally catching traction. The sedan fishtailed violently as Dave threw it back onto the dark highway, the speedometer needle flying rapidly up to 80, 90, 100 miles an hour. He didn't look in the rearview mirror once. He physically couldn't bring himself to do it. He was utterly terrified that, if he looked back into the red glow of his taillights, he would see those faceless, impossible things sprinting down the highway right behind his bumper, keeping up with the car. They drove in absolute, suffocating silence for 45 straight minutes before they finally saw the glowing neon signs of a massive, lit 24-hour truck stop. Dave pulled into a parking spot right under the brightest streetlight he could find, put the car in park, and completely broke down, his entire body shaking violently against the steering wheel. Once they finally managed to calm down enough to speak coherently, they called 911. They told the dispatcher everything. The abandoned gas station on the old highway, the figures in the black coats, the faceless heads, and the heavy, human-sized canvas bag. The police promised to send a cruiser out to the location immediately to check it out. A few days later, safely back in the crowded, noisy environment of his apartment in Los Angeles, Dave gathered the courage to follow up with that specific county sheriff's department. The deputy on the phone told him they had sent 2 patrol cars to that exact abandoned station on the old highway that same night. They found the fresh, chaotic tire tracks from Dave's car peeling out in the mud. But that was it. There was no black canvas bag left behind. There were no footprints near the rock formation. The incredibly heavy rain had completely washed away any and all other evidence. The deputy kindly suggested that Dave and Marcus had just been completely exhausted, that their sleep-deprived brains were playing extreme tricks on them in the dark and the middle of a brutal storm. But Dave knows exactly what he saw. Marcus knows exactly what he saw. You don't hallucinate the exact same terrifying, specific detail at the exact same time. The dull, bone-like texture of those completely smooth, featureless faces is forever burned into Dave's retinas. It absolutely ruined him. Just the mere thought of being out on the open road at night, surrounded by miles of empty, pitch-black darkness, is enough to trigger a full-blown panic attack. He ended his long email to me with a deeply chilling thought. What if they weren't wearing masks at all? What if there are things out there, living out in the forgotten, isolated corners of the country, that simply aren't human? Things that specifically prey on tired, isolated travelers in the dead of night when no one else is around to hear them scream. I want to ask all of you listening right now, if you were in Dave's shoes, if you were exhausted, pulled over in the middle of nowhere, flashed your high beams into the dark, and saw 2 faceless anomalies dragging a body-sized bag through the mud, what would you do? Would you have frozen in pure terror, unable to move a muscle? Or would you have floored the gas pedal and never looked back? Let me know down in the comments below. And please remember, the next time you are on a long, dark drive and you really need to pull over at an abandoned stop in the middle of nowhere, maybe just lock your doors, keep driving, and hold it until morning. Stay safe out there, and good night. But the next story sent to me this week might be even more disturbing, because this time, whatever was waiting out there wasn't hiding in the storm. Second story comes from an anonymous listener who used to work for a popular grocery delivery app. He reached out to me recently, still deeply shaken by his experience, and swore he would never take a delivery job again. He told me, "I do not care how desperate I get for cash to pay rent. There are some roads you just should not drive down after dark. There are places out there where human beings just do not belong." What you are about to hear is his exact, unfiltered account of that night. So, turn off the lights, sit back, and listen closely. Let us rewind to about a year and a half ago. It was late October, right around the time the air gets that sharp, biting chill. I was a broke college student trying to hustle my way through the semester, picking up extra delivery shifts between classes. Usually, it is a mindless job. You pick up the bags, follow the GPS, drop the stuff off on a porch, take a photo, and move on. The pay was decent if you worked the late-night graveyard shifts. And since I am a night owl, that is exactly what I did. It was a Tuesday, around 10:30 at night. I was sitting in my car in a brightly lit parking lot, getting ready to clock out. Just as I went to tap offline, my last order popped up. The payout was weirdly high, almost triple the base rate, probably because of the distance. The address was deep into the rural part of the county, an area where streetlights end, cell service drops, and houses are separated by miles of dense woods. I did the math, figured it would take 40 minutes round trip, accepted the order, tossed the bags in my old Civic, and hit the road. The drive started out fine, but the further out I got, the more desolate it became. The paved highway turned into a cracked asphalt road, then transitioned into a narrow dirt path, heavily canopied by overgrown trees. My headlights only illuminated about 20 feet ahead. Beyond that was a wall of suffocating darkness. There were no other cars, no glowing windows, no sounds except the crunch of gravel and my engine. I looked at my phone. I had completely lost my GPS signal. Right then, a sudden, inexplicable dread formed in my stomach. The air in the car felt too cold. I had this strange, intrusive thought that I should not be out there, but I shook it off, blaming late-night horror movies, and kept driving. Finally, my GPS reconnected just long enough to announce I had arrived. I slowed down and pulled into a severely overgrown driveway. At the end sat a dilapidated 2-story farmhouse. The wood siding was rotting, the porch was sagging, and there was not a single light on. It looked completely abandoned. If it were not for a rusty mailbox with faded numbers perfectly matching my app, I would have reversed out immediately. I put the car in park but left the engine running, headlights aimed at the rotting porch. I grabbed the heavy paper bags and stepped out. The second my boots hit the dirt, the silence of the woods swallowed me whole. It was not a peaceful silence. It was a heavy, dead quiet that makes your ears ring. No crickets, no wind, just an unnatural vacuum. I walked up the creaking wooden steps, set the bags down, and pulled out my phone to take the delivery photo. My camera app glitched. The screen went black. As I tried to fix it, the hairs on the back of my neck stood straight up. Have you ever had that feeling? That primal instinct screaming that you are in danger. The overwhelming sensation that someone, or something, is standing right behind you, watching your every move. It hit me like a physical blow. My breath hitched. I felt freezing cold. Every nerve begged me to run, but human curiosity is a dangerous thing. Slowly, I peeked over my left shoulder. Looking past the trunk of my car into the pitch-black tree line, I could not see anything, but I could feel it. The gaze was heavy and malicious. I felt like prey. Panic took over. I abandoned the phone glitch, scrambled down the steps, threw myself into the driver's seat, and aggressively hit the lock button. I threw the car into reverse, my heart hammering violently, and tore backward out of the driveway. I did not care if I hit the mailbox. I just wanted to get back to civilization. I shifted into drive and slammed on the gas, pushing 50 miles an hour on the dirt road, gripping the steering wheel until my knuckles were white. A few miles down, the dirt transitioned back to asphalt. I started to let out a shaky breath, convincing myself I had just let my imagination run wild. That is exactly when it happened. Out of absolutely nowhere. 50 feet ahead, a heavy metal traffic sign violently snapped at the base. It did not fall from decay. It was forcefully ripped down, crashing onto the road with a deafening metallic clang. There was no wind, no other cars. It was as if something invisible and incredibly powerful had swatted a steel pole to the ground. I screamed and slammed on the brakes. My tires screeched, the smell of burning rubber filling the cabin as the car jerked to a stop just feet from the sign. My high beams cut through the darkness, and that is when my headlights swept across the edge of the dense tree line. Standing there, hovering just outside the direct beam, was a creature. For a fraction of a second, my brain tried to rationalize it. A stray dog, a coyote, a sick deer. But it was not. It was enormous, the size of a Great Dane, but its skeletal proportions were horribly wrong. Its body was gaunt, wrapped in pale, almost translucent white skin with patchy gray fur. Its front limbs were weirdly elongated, ending in thick claws. The worst part was its head. It looked vaguely canine, but the snout was blunt, like a deformed human face stretched over a wolf skull. Its oversized eyes reflected a sickly, glowing pale yellow. It was not growling, it was just standing there, frozen like a statue, staring dead at me through the windshield. Unblinking, intelligent. Pure, paralyzing panic washed over me. I snapped out of my trance, swerved hard into the oncoming lane to bypass the fallen sign, and slammed my foot on the gas pedal. I was speeding recklessly, engine roaring, tears of terror welling in my eyes. I thought the speed of the car had left it far behind. But a morbid compulsion forced me to look up into my rearview mirror. The red glow of my taillights painted the dark road behind me. Through the settling dust, I saw it. The pale, giant dog-like creature was not on all fours anymore. It was standing up. It was standing perfectly upright on its two hind legs, towering in the middle of the road, easily over 7 feet tall. Its posture was crooked, hunched over with those long, freakish front arms dangling by its sides. But it was unmistakably bipedal. For one terrifying second, I swear our eyes met in the reflection of that tiny mirror. And then, with a jerky, bounding motion that looked horrifyingly human, it turned and sprinted deep into the black woods at a speed that defied logic. I do not remember the rest of the drive. I think my brain dissociated. I did not slow down or look in the mirror again until I reached a brightly lit gas station at the edge of the city limits. I parked under the brightest street lamp, locked the doors, and sat there for 2 hours, violently shaking and unable to stop crying. The cashier eventually came out and asked if I was okay. But what could I say? I just saw a pale, deformed dog stand like a man and run into the forest. He would have called an ambulance for a psychiatric hold. I pulled out my phone right there, unassigned my future shifts, cashed out, and deleted the app. I never went back to that side of the county. It has been over a year, and I still have vivid nightmares about those glowing yellow eyes. People try to rationalize it. They tell me it was a trick of the light, a sick bear, or an exhausted brain playing tricks. But I know what I saw. I know how the dead silence felt, and I know that whatever I delivered those groceries to, it was not the person who ordered them. Something ancient and wrong was waiting at that farmhouse, and it followed me. So, as we wrap up tonight's story, let me ask you this. Think about it carefully. If you were driving down an empty, pitch-black road in the dead of night, and you looked in your rearview mirror to see a monster staring right back at you, what would you do? And if you thought those back roads were terrifying, wait until you hear what was found deep in the silent winter woods. The last story comes from an anonymous listener. It's a story about the kind of isolation that plays tricks on your mind. At least, you pray it's just your mind playing tricks. Because if it's real, it means there are things sharing the dark corners of the world with us. Things that do not belong in our reality. The person who sent this in swore that they will never move back to the woods. And after hearing this, I don't think you will want to either. It was early February 2018. I was living out in a rural part of upstate New York, in a small A-frame cabin surrounded by miles of dense, old-growth pine forest. We had just been slammed by a historic blizzard. The kind of storm that doesn't just blanket the town, it buries it. The roads were completely impassable, the power was flickering, and for 3 days, I hadn't seen another human soul. It was just me and my German shepherd Duke. By the 4th day, the storm finally broke, leaving behind a sky as gray as iron and about 3 feet of fresh powder. The cabin fever was getting bad. The walls felt like they were closing in. Duke was pacing by the door, whining, practically begging to get out and stretch his legs. Figuring it was safe enough, since the wind had died down, I bundled up in my heaviest gear, strapped on my snowshoes, and we headed out the back door into the tree line. There is a specific kind of silence that happens after a massive snowfall in the deep woods. The snow acts like a giant acoustic sponge. It absorbs everything. There are no birds chirping, no leaves rustling. It is a heavy, dead quiet. It was beautiful, but as we pushed further into the trees, that silence started to feel heavy, oppressive. We were about a half-mile from the cabin when Duke stopped dead in his tracks. He didn't bark. That was the first red flag. Duke was a vocal dog, but right then, he just froze. His tail tucked tightly between his legs. The fur along his spine stood straight up, and he let out this low, vibrating growl that barely parted his lips. He was staring at a patch of unbroken snow a few yards ahead of us. I walked over, the snow crunching loudly under my snowshoes, and looked down. Right there, in the middle of a pristine, undisturbed drift, was a set of tracks. They were hoof prints. Small ones, maybe the size of a yearling deer. But that wasn't what made my blood run cold. It was the pattern. There was a left print, a right print, another left, and then nothing. They just ended. I looked back to see where they came from, and there was nothing there either. It was just 3 distinct hoof prints right in the middle of nowhere. No tracks leading up to that spot, and no tracks leading away. It was as if an animal had materialized out of thin air, taken 3 steps, and simply evaporated. I stood there trying to rationalize it. Did snow fall from a branch and cover the rest? No, the trees above were bare. Did an eagle pick up a fawn? No, there were no wing marks, no struggle, no blood. Just 3 impossibly isolated prints. A cold shiver crawled up my neck, and suddenly, the silence of the woods didn't feel peaceful anymore. It felt like I was being watched. I looked up from the tracks, and my eyes scanned the dense cluster of pine trees about 50 feet away. In the shadows between the massive trunks, something moved. At first, my brain tried to tell me it was just a dead tree swaying, but there was no wind. None. I squinted, trying to focus on the shape, and what I saw will be burned into my nightmares until the day I die. It was tall. Unbelievably tall. It had to be at least 8 or 9 feet, standing on 2 legs, but it was impossibly thin. Its limbs looked like stretched out, twisted birch branches. Its skin, or whatever covered it, was a pale, sickly gray that almost blended in with the snow, but not quite. But it was the face that broke something in my brain. It was elongated, pulled down like taffy. There was no nose, and absolutely no mouth, just a smooth, pale expanse of skin where the lower half of its face should have been. And its eyes, they were massive, solid black, and shiny, like 2 pieces of polished obsidian. They were reflecting the dull gray light of the winter sky. and they were locked directly onto me. It didn't stand like a living thing. Its posture was crooked, entirely wrong. And then it moved. It didn't walk. It didn't take steps. It jerked forward, its limbs snapping into new positions with sudden, unnatural speed, like a corrupted file in a video game or a stop-motion puppet missing half its frames. 1 second it was behind a tree, the next second it was 10 feet closer. But it wasn't walking on the snow. It was gliding silently, right over the top of the powder, without disturbing a single snowflake. Duke finally broke. He didn't attack, he completely panicked. He ripped the leash right out of my thick winter glove and bolted back towards the cabin, kicking up a massive cloud of snow. That snapped me out of my paralysis. My survival instinct screamed at me to run. I spun around and started moving as fast as the snowshoes would allow. If you've ever tried to run in snowshoes, you know it's a clumsy, exhausting nightmare. My lungs were burning, breathing in the freezing air like swallowing razor blades. I could hear my own heartbeat pounding in my ears. I didn't look back. I was absolutely terrified that if I turned my head, that faceless, twitching thing would be right behind me, reaching out with those long, unnatural arms. I made it back to the cabin. Duke was already waiting on the porch, scratching frantically at the door. I shoved us both inside, threw the deadbolt, locked every window, and pulled the curtains shut. I sat on the living room floor for hours with my hunting rifle across my lap, jumping at every creak the house made as the temperature dropped. The next few days were a living hell. The snowplows still hadn't made it out to my road. I was trapped. I slept with the lights on, waking up in a cold sweat every time the house settled. Duke refused to go outside to do his business. I had to put down puppy pads in the bathroom. He spent the entire week curled up under my bed, shivering. On the 5th day, a neighbor with a heavy-duty plow finally broke through the road to check on me. Seeing a normal truck pull into my driveway was the greatest relief of my life. I went to the window to wave at him, but as I looked down at my front yard, my heart stopped all over again. Overnight, fresh tracks had appeared in the snow right outside my living room window. They weren't hoof prints this time. They looked like bare, human footprints, except the toes were wrong. They were too long, and they ended in deep, sharp gouges in the ice, like massive claws. I traced the path of the tracks with my eyes. They circled the entire house, stopping at every single window. But the worst part was where they ended. The tracks moved away from the house, walked exactly halfway across the front yard, and just stopped, just like the hooves in the woods. One deep footprint, and then perfectly smooth, untouched snow all around it. As if whatever was walking around my house, peering into my windows while I slept, had just stepped right up into the sky. I packed whatever I could fit into my truck that afternoon. I followed the plow out of the driveway, and I never went back. I broke my lease, lost my deposit, and I didn't care. I moved to a busy city apartment, as far away from the woods as I could get. I need streetlights, I need traffic noise, because absolute silence terrifies me now. People tell me it was just stress. They say cabin fever makes you hallucinate. They say the tracks were just melting snow, playing tricks on my eyes. But I know what I saw in those woods. I know the unnatural way it moved, and I know it was looking right at me. So, let me ask you a question. If you were trapped in a cabin, miles from help, completely cut off by a blizzard, and you woke up to find impossible footprints circling your bedroom window, what would you do?